And Mark,
Just a
I think
second.
you're going to introduce Woody.
Hi, Woody. So glad you're here. Woody runs multiple programs in the Earth Science Division. And the amazing thing is, he ran what I think was the first ever citizen science funding call, which was from NASA, which was the 2016 Citizen Science for Earth Systems program. And he's also funded projects through his ecological forecasting program. And the bottom line is he's been funding citizen science at NASA since before I came to headquarters. So I consider him one of the founding fathers of NASA citizen science. And he's supported blockbusters like Snapshot Wisconsin, Mosquito Habitat Mappers, NemoNet, Floating Forests, and also some projects that maybe you haven't heard of, Map of Life, Bird Returns, all kinds of interesting stuff. Anyway, I can't wait to hear how you got this all started. Woody, take it away.
We're not hearing you.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Hear
great.
ya.
I had to start fix myself. Thanks, guys. Mark, thanks for that very generous intro. Sarah, thanks for setting this up and for helping with the slides. Again, Woody Turner here. I manage a couple of programs, actually jointly now with Keith Gaddis here, Dr. Keith Gaddis at NASA headquarters. One's a research program that's focused on biological diversity. The other, as Mark was saying, is a applied sciences program, an applications program. I'll talk about that in a second. It used to be called ecological forecasting. It's now called ecological conservation. When we got started doing citizen science type work, it was called ecological forecasting. So Sarah, whoever, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So this is the purpose. I'm just going to try to take a little look back at this initial call, what we did and why we did it, provide a couple of examples. There are a number of them out there. Happy to take some questions. Max, thanks for setting this up so well in terms of explaining roses to folks. This particular call that I'm going to talk about, in fact, almost all the calls you're going to hear about it, were done in ROSES, Research Opportunities for Space and Earth Sciences, which is our omnibus solicitation for NASA science writ large. Of course, I'm in the Earth Science Division, so we're launching stuff to look back at space. We have 4 big elements. There's the flight folks that build and operate the spacecraft. There's the technology group, which is developing new technology for spacecraft or for instruments on the spacecraft. There's the research division, which does, it's like an NSF for satellites, funds a lot of work for basic research understanding. It's analogous also to the planetary science or the astrophysics or heliophysics program in terms of basic research science. Primary output there would be understanding, increased knowledge. And then there's the applied sciences program, and that's where this particular effort falls, in that it's really geared toward taking work that's been done under these other 3 elements of the Earth Science Division, so flight, technology, and research, and applying it more broadly for societal benefit. For federal users often, but for all kinds of you. It could be state level, could be even municipality level, could be regional, could be private sector, nonprofits, et cetera. So it's very much about coming up with remote sensing-based solutions to problems out there. And we've got several programs in that. This one I'm going to talk about it was called ecological forecasting, now ecological conservation. It's really focused on the issue of, as it sounds, ecological conservation, so conserving life on Earth, stemming the global biodiversity crisis that we're in now. So it's applications program. I should note that it's focused on terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems, so across the board. And so the way we do this is essentially to require folks, excuse me, proposing to us under ROSES to combine 3 things. One, it's NASA, so NASA Earth observations, satellite data, other NASA observations need to be part of the mix. In situ biological data, and that can be anything from species information to broader ecosystem data to genetic information, camera traps, acoustics, tracking data on organisms, eDNA, other omics type data sets, et cetera, old school surveys going back hundreds of years. So in situ biological data is actually really key. That's where the biodiversity happens, right? But it's also extremely rare, and that's really one of the reasons that got us into this what we call crowdsourcing time citizen science approach. The other thing we require are models, and these can be ecological models, be other types of models. The models essentially do several things. One, they allow for forecasting, and so this program was not only about trying to just do static maps of what was where, but also come up with a sense of building on NASA's heritage in weather forecasting going all the way back to the 60s, when we caught the clouds moving from space, and into the 70s, and then getting into more climate, longer range, think 50 plus years, longer range climate forecasts in the 80s and 90s as the Earth observing system came into its own. We'd like to do something similar with living systems, with ecosystems. And so this combination of Earth observations, in situ biological data, and then models, particularly with a forecasting bent, all three pieces were critical for these projects and required for these projects. The other reason models are really important here is that they tend to be the platform on which the integration between the satellite data and the in situ data happens. They also, this is where, they're hopefully ingesting both types of data and allowing us to sort of come up with a common framework for linking across spatial scales, sometimes temporal scales, in bringing these data sets together. And again, as Max was saying, our primary vehicle for this is ROSES. These are open, competed, peer-reviewed solicitations. Anybody's welcome to apply. We fund U.S. institutions, be they public, private, not-for-profit, commercial, et cetera. And with that, I think I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the particular solicitation that Mark was talking about came out as an amendment to ROSES 2012. So it's been over 10 years, over a decade ago now. I think of it as A36. That's my shorthand for it. A36 was specifically focused on earth science applications. So it's an applications effort, again, to do societal benefit, address management solutions with satellite in situ data. And it was called Ecological Forecasting for Conservation and Natural Resource Management. Really the primary focus for the whole program, conservation, natural resource management. And it required that package, as I mentioned earlier, of NASA satellite data, in situ biological data, and models. And the in situ biological observations could be from ecosystem, species, or genetic components, but we required at that point in that call back in it actually was an amendment to 2012. It came at the end of 2012, and so we got our proposals in 2013 and reviewed them in 2013. But it required that at least some of that in situ biological data, again, ecosystem, species, genetic, whatever, be from a crowdsourcing initiative. And crowdsourcing is actually, I would say, a sort of a superset of citizen science, in that it includes what we traditionally think of as citizen science. That's individuals, folks in the public, collecting observations and then pooling them in some way, generally on the web, and then allowing them or allowing for data that has been captured in many ways to be looked at, observed, and somehow either qualified or quantified by citizens on the web. Crowdsourcing also in this case could include, it could be experts. The experts, crowds of folks in academia or in a particular agency that were combining their data sets to get it. So it wasn't just sort of the citizen side, but we certainly wanted more citizens input, and I'll talk to that in a second. So why did we want to do it? What was the inspiration? This was just early on, where there were a lot of books and articles coming about just the surprising power of the crowd to get things right at scale. In other words, if you had enough observations of all kinds of phenomena, everything from beans in a jar to birds through eBird to you name it, health applications, et cetera. Regardless of the capacity of the investigators, if you had enough observations, the predictions tended to be incredibly robust. So the power of the crowd was just sort of dawning on people back then. We wanted to harness that. We also were beset by a problem in that one of those three types of information, again, reminding you, satellite data from NASA, in situ biological information, and models, of those, one of the three was less robust, I'd say far less robust than the other, particularly with regard to time series data. This was back in the 2000s, 2010s. And so at that point, through the Earth observing system, through other platforms, Landsat, for example, we had decadal remote sensing data. In other words, time series of greater than a decade for several remote sensing systems, and they were continuing to generate data. And so that was fairly robust, not super far back in time, of course, but again, you had, daily, in some cases, weekly, monthly, whatever, data of the Earth from space, climate phenomena, land cover phenomena, et cetera, et cetera. But what was really lacking, models, of course, were out there and getting more and more sophisticated, and thinking here specifically about species distribution modeling, which by this point in time are already beginning to incorporate satellite data as a dependent variable into those models, as driver for those models. So that was starting to get fairly common, and the types of these correlative and also not correlative species distribution models were really exploding at this point in time. So it was a great time for that. But where we lacked robust time series data was in the in situ biological category. And when I started, doing this work at NASA, I was sort of surprised. I thought, well, people have been collecting and observing life on this planet since well before Darwin and others. And, I thought, oh, we'd have these amazing time series going back for hundreds of years for all types of organisms. Turns out, with the exception of a few cases, I'm thinking here of fisheries. I mean, the Japanese and Russians have fisheries data going back over a century, but most people don't. Hunting data, again, other exploited natural resource organisms like hunting records, which tend to be at the state level. But apart from those limited, relatively few, and sort of targeted focus exceptions, there was a real lack of time series, what I'll call in situ observations of biology, any types of in situ observations. They just were generally lacking. So we really lacked something to compare to the satellite data. And so one of the rationales for crowdsourcing and citizen science as a part of it was to just get more people taking observations. Cell phones were coming on that time, so there was they were getting photos. People were doing Flickr and putting time-stamped and geo-referenced photos online. So just the potential seemed huge. So and we needed to tap that because we just didn't have good records. iNaturalist was getting spun up. eBird was already in place. So all these things were starting to happen. And so we said, I want to tap into that. We want to tap into that at NASA and just bump up the number of in situ observations. Also, the beauty of citizen science is you can challenge. iNaturalist has been, for example, great at this, saying we want folks in this area of the world to go out and look for these particular taxa, reptiles, amphibians, insects, whatever it might be. And, oh, by the way, we particularly want you to target some of these rare, unusual taxa. Can you find them? You can sort of bring challenges to bear and have people really go out and try to scan an area that might not have been scanned well, or look for taxa that are not well, not that well recorded. So that was a huge incentive. Mentioned already the fact that technologies are really coming of age at this time to allow us to this. Not just the observing technologies. Again, mentioned acoustics, mentioned camera traps, mentioned cell phones, and just putting a camera in everybody's hand with a georeference capability. You could record data, et cetera. Biotelemetry, other tracking mechanisms. eDNA was still in its infancy, but it was just, you could see it coming, betting on the genomics approaches were also starting to happen. And then the web, of course, was allowing us, for large amounts of computational capability to bring these data sets together and to put them somewhere and allow us to compare them with the satellite data, which are also being managed on the web. So that was a great opportunity. And then finally, the other thing that we wanted to do, this is still true, but it was more true then, it's still true. A lot of folks, people like taxpayers that we rely on to support these federal programs, still don't know that NASA really does Earth science. It's like, wait, you guys do space stuff, right? You're a space agency, but we also spend a lot of time, money, and effort on using space as a place, as a vantage point to look back at our own planet. It's a great vantage point, but a lot of people, even my own family, were sort of like, wait, what? You do Earth science at NASA? What's that about? So we really wanted to use this crowdsourcing and citizen science effort or outreach as a way just to engage with folks, to educate folks, not only to get more observations, but also just to let folks know that, hi, Earth science exists at NASA. We do biological diversity. We're interested in developing something called ecological forecasting. We need your help. So amplification of in situ observation and engagement were the two big reasons. And then from that point, we've included crowdsourcing and other calls. There was one, again, in 2016 that mentioned it, et cetera. So next slide, please. Sorry, I spent a lot of time on that, but try to hurry up because I know we don't have much more time. This is just a list of the 10 projects that were funded for 4 years of work under that initial 836 call. You can get a sense, again, to mention terrestrial, marine, some freshwater. You've got all kinds of stuff going on with different systems, some more ecosystem level, some more species level. You can see eBird there with the avian abundance estimation in Cornell, people doing harmful algal blooms off the California coast, folks looking at freshwater fishes for the Bureau of Land Management in the Arctic, folks doing penguins in the Antarctic. Some really fun stuff, great stuff. When you started scratching the surface, it was amazing what was going on out there, and could talk about each of these independently for a while. And then the final slide, oops, as my computer goes black. Quickly log back in, there we go. Thanks, Sarah. One of these projects mentioned Sapsot, Wisconsin. Mark, thanks for the setup. This is Phil Townsend's PI, University of Wisconsin, working with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. They manage hunting, set quotas for hunting in the state. There's a lot of hunting in Wisconsin. Actually, a lot of fur bears in Wisconsin. It's incredibly rich. I mean, they have wolves, bears, foxes, the whole, deer, et cetera. And so what this was doing was basically combining camera trap data, and the state was providing support for individuals, private property owners, as well as state land, to put these cameras on their property. And so they were covering the state with these things to try to get a better count, a better abundance estimates of mammals in the state of Wisconsin. We combined that with MODIS data to look at green up and brown down and to track how phenological changes, seasonal changes, how that worked with changes in herbivore and predator abundance. Of course, the herbivores track the greenness, and then the carnivores track the herbivores, and you got these sort of waves up and down in the abundance, and you can what's where. There were some interesting things found out through that. Data on the right are from the some predator occurrence data. So anytime you're doing ecology, as you guys well know, two big things are place and number. Where is it and how many of them are there? It's distribution and abundance. This was helping to get both of those and helping us to align it with climate and land cover proxies for abundance and distribution. Next and final slide before my thank you is, I mentioned eBird. Steve Kelling at Cornell worked closely with folks at eBird, set up a very sophisticated modeling system using eBird data to look at, where the birds are, when they're there, passing through. They've got these great heat maps. You can go online and track this stuff. What made this really cool is that we used MODIS, again, MODIS is a very popular data set at the time, to look at freshwater systems in the Central Valley of California. Central Valley is right on the Pacific Flyway, very important migratory corridor for western birds, water birds in this case. It's also probably the richest agricultural landscape in the U.S. And there are a lot of folks, strangely enough, at least at the time, and to me it's strange, they grow rice in the Central Valley, which means flooded fields. And so what the Nature Conservancy, working with eBird, working with NASA, did something called bird returns. And what it was a reverse auction procedure in which they asked rice farmers in the spring and in the fall during the peak migratory periods how much it would take for TNC in this case to pay them to keep their rice fields flooded for a few more weeks each year, again in the spring and the fall, to allow pop-up habitat for migratory birds tracked by eBird going towards, and we use the satellite to, of course, get a sense of where the water was and how the birds were responding to the water, as well as, again, greenness productivity of the surrounding landscapes. And with Landsat, I think Landsat data were also used to get a finer grain look at what's going on at the landscape level. Here's a picture of a rice farmer, kept her fields flooded, and these pop-up, I mean, these are they're not actual formal, nature reserves in the sense that, oh, it's a state or a locality or a federal park, but what they are private pop-up reserves maintained by rice farmers to allow water birds on their way north and south, migrating to the valley, to have habitat to rest, to feed, and to get back on the road again, essentially pit stops. So amazingly powerful example of and a really interesting economics, a lot of cool stuff in this project. So that's that. I'm going to close there. I probably overtalked my time by a good bit, and I'll thank you, Mark and Sarah, for the opportunity. It was great to get this started, and since then, Mark and Sarah and I have taken this now. It's become a, you know, I'm not sure who did it for. I think the astronomers probably did it before we did in Earth science, but this was one of the first applications of the Earth science front for crowdsourcing / citizen science. So it's really then, you know, taken off. A lot of other projects, in a sense, have used it. It's great. Again, we need those data sets. We need the in situ biological data in time series. It's good for that. It's also really good for just getting people back out, looking at nature, engaging with nature. It's like you're recreating the natural history popularity of the late 19th century. We have these guys, you know, these bishops in England and churchmen and other individuals in England going out and recording what they saw, which was sort of the beginning of the first real wave of natural history studies around the world. So really excited. Great to be a part of this. Thanks for letting me speak. Sorry to go so long. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Thank you, Woody.
for sharing that history. It's fun to hear. And it's a lot of those projects, 2 of those projects are still kind of with us. Heather Lynch is still going strong with her penguin mapping in Antarctica, and Snapshot Wisconsin is winding down too. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'd say even more than 2, Sarah. We've got a number of these guys that are still thriving. Part of the Applied Sciences program mantra or goal is to fund things that will continue to exist after the NASA funding, which is usually 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, stops. And so we're all about transitioning those funded efforts, those applied sciences funded efforts, to other users, we call end users or partners, to continue support after the NASA funding goes away. So that's just a sign of a good project. So thanks for calling those out.
Thank you. Mark, and is this a question for Woody? Or are we going to pull
Woody.
Max back in? All right, one more for Woody, and then we have a lot of questions for Max.
Woody,
Go
can
ahead.
you say more about what it took to get these programs started? Like how did you convince people that it was cool to use citizen science?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Mark. As you no doubt know yourself as a NASA program manager, we have a fair amount of latitude to sort of write these solicitations in way. I would say we're less scripted maybe than NSF is. That's not to knock NSF. They've got a different approach, but we're often able to tailor our calls. And so I sort of got, I mean, I wasn't alone, but you know, there was such a groundswell for citizen science work at that time that I was able just to write it into the call. I didn't really have to clear it with anybody. I mean, I'd say NASA, excuse me, sorry about that. NASA management, my management read the call and looked at it, but you know, they pretty much let us run with what we want to do as long as it's not in completely nuts. So I was able just to stick it in there. It was intriguing. I thought there'd be potential there. And yeah, with remarkably little bureaucracy, was able to sort of insert that into the call. So yeah, it's one of the great things about being a program manager at NASA. We have a fair amount of latitude in what we do.
Super. Thank you.